Okay, so I found some time in between job hunting and I realized it might be fun to try recreate the Playable teaser. It's an unreleased Silent Hill game on the PlayStation 4 where you have this infinite repeating corridor that gives these kind of creepy vibes because the level never seems to end. And I figured, why not try and make this in Unreal Engine and create a quick prototype that simulates that effect. So let's dive into it. So in order to kick this off, I actually discovered that on the marketplace there is this awesome pack of horror game elements that you can just readily use. It offers you everything from spooky effects to awesome opening, closing doors that lock behind you as the player has no idea what's going on. And that's what we're going to be using to quickly prototype this. So we navigate to the horror engine and just create a project that whatever Unreal Engine you personally prefer. I'm using 4.25 in this specific video. So once that's downloaded, what I did first is just open it up, have a quick look around, and what I want this functionality just as in the Playable teaser where the door closes behind you and locks as you enter these continuous hallways, one after another. And I quickly realized that there were just functions for that, so I didn't even have to look into the complex code and I could just call those functions. So I created my own actor, BP underscore infinite corridor, or repeating corridor, just name it whatever you like. And what I did there is just create a nice looking corridor. Usually you'd preferably do something like this in a level instance so that you can load in level instances where you can just easily bake the lighting beforehand and get this beautiful corridor with amazing lighting without it really costing too much. But since this is just a quick and dirty prototype just to see if we can make this work, that's not what we're going to be doing. So let's skip ahead till I've kind of constructed a bit of a corridor and we get to more interesting parts. What's important though is everything is centered around that origin point. You don't want to move that origin point, so you don't want to move the actor's route. You just want to build out of that route basically. But just follow along as I'm doing in the video. But let's skip ahead for now. Okay, so it was at this point that I was satisfied I wanted to add my door in, so I clicked add new actor and I added a child actor, which was going to be the door. So I navigate to the details panel and there you can actually just select which class you want it to be. So I selected the door. Its scale was completely messed up, so just reset the scale and rotation in the details panel if that happens to you, and then I moved it to where I wanted it. So I wanted it to stand on that route and partially overlap the door frame with whatever corridor might be spawned in front of it, and then whichever corridor we're in now, so that no matter where we would be along this gameplay state, along these corridors, the door would always make it feel as if it's properly endless and not give away that we're just putting one of these after the other. So just nicely center in there and then we can move on. And one little thing I personally did, but you can design whatever corridor you like, is I added a little window here in the corner, just because that's something that the Playable teaser I remember and loved had as well. and then we actually get to where some of the magic starts happening. So the next thing I added was a arrow actor. So I had to reattach it to the root and fix its scale and rotation real quick. And the reason I'm using this arrow actor is this is actually going to define where the next corridor will be placed. So by simply getting the world transform of this arrow, we have the exact point for which we want to place the next corridor. And arrow actors are great for these kinds of things because they give a good visual indication of where it's going to be, and by default they will be hidden in game, so you don't have to worry about it. Just add it in and you have a perfect point for your next corridor. So now that the corridor design is complete and I quickly added in a light actor to make it cooler, you can actually start with the implementation of its functionality. So the first thing we are going to add is simply a actor reference. So I accidentally made an integer, but you want to set it to an actor reference, and this actor reference is going to be a reference to our previous corridor. So whenever the character crosses into a new corridor, we will be able to delete the old one so that we don't have an infinite stacking up of corridors one on top of the other. So the next thing we need is a trigger to actually start this functionality so that we know when the character has entered the corridor and when we want to close the door behind him and create a new corridor around the corner. So just add in a box collision actor and scale it up and move it around until you have it at a position where the player will not immediately spawn into it, but will definitely have to cross it before going around the corner, so that the next corridor is always spawned in way before they're able to turn around. So in the details panel we can navigate to the event functions we can implement, and we implement the onActorBegin overlap event. And in order to make this generic, what we're actually going to do is we're going to check if it's overlapping with whatever actor the player is currently controlling. So we get a reference to the player controller, and from there we actually just drag out a reference to whichever pawn the player is currently possessing. By doing it this way, we can just compare if these actors match, and that way we don't need a specific class reference to whatever actor we have implemented, whatever class we're using as the player actor, and we can simply have this kind of generic implementation. So the next thing we need is just a branch to check if this boolean is true, and the next thing we can do is we can implement the functionality of the door closing behind the player after this trigger has been reached. So we need a reference to the child actor, and from there we can drag out the rest of the code, which will first be a cast to the correct class so that we can actually access all of the functions we need. And then you'll see that as I am partially into dragging out the I think the lock door, close door call, I realize it's much easier to move this entire functionality up into the begin play node. So we only have to do this cast whenever begin play is called, and just save the final child actor reference right away. So we only have to do this once, which is what you'll see me do now. So from there we just drag out that casting result and we promote it to a variable, and we name it whatever we like. We can just call it the door reference, and now we can just grab that reference and pull out whichever function calls we need without having to do any casting anymore. So I'm gonna lock the door first so you can't interact with it anymore, and then I will proceed to close the door behind the player, and then we'll dive into spawning a new corridor. And then I swap the closing and the locking around. It makes much more sense to first close the door before locking it, so I do that. I don't know what the boolean for the horror event does. I just set it to true because whatever it does, I mean, it's supposed to be scary that the door closes and locks behind you, so let's just tick it on even though I have no idea what it does. And from there on, what we can do is we can start adding a new corridor. However, before adding a new definitive corridor, I want to first see if we have a previous corridor and just get rid of that. So I get a reference to the previous corridor and check if it's valid. And if it is valid, then we want to call destroy on this actor so that it will nicely clean up whatever previous corridor we had. What we can then do is turn this into a sequence, because regardless of what the result of this is, we want to spawn a new corridor. So we just add in a sequence node before this, and the second step in the sequence will be where we spawn the next corridor. And keep in mind, we added this neat little arrow component which will give us the exact transform we need. So all we have to do is get a spawn actor with a specific class, and then we obviously select the class that we want. But first I will drag out a reference to the arrow component and get its world transform, and keep in mind this has to be world space because otherwise it won't really line up that well. And we just plug that in, and then we make sure it always spawns. We don't care about collision, and then we select another one of these corridor classes that we created, and this should already do the trick. Now whenever the player crosses the box collision that we're checking the overlap event for, a new corridor will be spawned, and if available, the old one will be destroyed. So in order to quickly go test that out, we will create a level, call it whatever you like. I called it corridor level, and we just open that up. And in there we just have to create some stuff so that it doesn't look like nothing. So we go into view options and enable engine content so that we can actually look for the word sky. Then we can go to engine sky and find the sky sphere blueprint, pardon me, and add in a directional light actor. And this will allow us to set the sky to whatever the directional light actor is oriented at. So it will match up basically with the sun, and I will rotate this along the y-axis to point completely upwards. You will only have this arrow in Unreal 4.25 and up, and then if you go into the blueprint of the sky sphere and select that lighting actor and refresh the material, you will actually get a neat little night sky. So I'm gonna see if I can turn out the intensity a little bit because it's still quite bright, but this is actually enough to already have a quick test level. So when that's done, we navigate to our main content folder where we have our blueprint, and we just drag in that corridor. Place it wherever you like it. I don't know why I dragged it up, quite honestly, and all we will need then is just a player start actor to define where our character begins. And this is where I noticed that there's not much room between the door and my box collider, so I will have to go back into my blueprint and move that box collision forward just a little bit so that there's room to spawn a player before the event gets triggered. So from there on out, just go up to the left here and look for a player start, drag that in, make sure it fits in there properly. Like this hallway that I designed is only just big enough to fit our player, and we can go have a quick look. So we just click play, and the door is not locked yet because we have not passed through that actor yet, through that box collision. Now we did. We saw some stuff change, and look at it, the door is perfectly locked. And let's go around the corner. There it is, there's another corridor right there. It spawned perfectly on the arrow. With the only downside, it seems that we have two corridors clipping through each other. So we have two doors, and I would be surprised if we have two doors here. It seems that because we're not checking if the player has already passed through that box collision, we can actually pass through that box collision and trigger that collision event as many times as we want. Meaning that we can stack up a crazy amount of doors just by having it trigger too many times. And you see here that we did not clean up the previous door yet. So that final door that didn't open was actually the first door, because we went in a perfect circle. So the next thing we need to do is we drag out the newly created actor, which is the next corridor, and we set that corridor's reference to the previous corridor as the current corridor. I don't know if that makes any sense, but trust me on that one. We're basically telling the next corridor to have a reference to the current corridor, so that when the player hits that collision trigger in the next corridor, this old corridor will be deleted. So the next thing to do is we want to make sure that this box only gets triggered once. And the first way I decided to do that, which you'll see me revise a little later, was just to see if the door was already locked. Because if the door is already locked, this thing has already been triggered. So I get a reference to the door and I check if it is already locked and get a not boolean. So if it's not locked, we want our door to close and actually lock, so only that one time. So now I move on to testing that out, and you'll see that it kind of does what we want. So we move ahead, and then we should only have one door because we only passed through it once, and the previous corridor gets deleted. The door is now locked. Unfortunately, we do see that the door issue can still occur, so in order to get rid of that, we should swap out the check for whether or not the door is locked and simply put in a boolean that will be set to true after the player triggers this logic once, ensuring that after that, with a quick branch check, we can see that it's already happened, and we can ensure that it will never happen a second time. And that concludes our little experiment. It's fully functional now. We no longer get the double door glitch. The spawning of a new corridor only happens just that once like we want to. And it is completed, so I hope you enjoyed this little prototyping experiment. If you actually want to do something like this in a final game, I would advise looking into level streaming instead, but this is just the easiest way to quickly get something like this into your prototypes. Yeah, so I hope this was fun, and good luck.